What's the aim of mixing? Why are we doing this mysterious art of mixing a track? Well, the priority is to produce a track that has a maximum output of -1 dB. It's 5 o'clock on a Monday, and you know what that means. Oops, wrong channel. If you're new here, welcome. If you're an old friend, good day. So, on today's episode, we are going to have a look at the hardware that you might need in 2024 to start producing music. We're going to also look at the basics of mixing and how you can get your cues up to a professional level, and I will also do that by showing you a demo in Logic of going through that mixing process. Don't forget to support the channel. A like and subscribe is always appreciated. It's okay, I can wait while you do it now. Thank you. Let's get on with today's episode of Music Monday. Okay, let's have a think about the hardware that you need to be able to compose professional tracks. One of the first decisions you're going to have to make is, are you going to use Mac or Windows? That may be a personal choice that you hate one or the other. And what it is going to affect is the digital audio workstation or DAW that you choose to use. Logic is specific to Mac, so you would have to buy a Macintosh to use Logic. The others have options for Windows and Macs, and that is not an extensive list of all the DAWs available. So do some research. Maybe you're already up to speed with one and you would like to continue using that. So a bit of research on the DAW you want may affect whether you choose Mac or Windows. If you choose a computer, don't forget you need a monitor. A laptop obviously has a built-in screen, but often they are restricted in size, and it is sometimes useful to have a second screen anyway for a laptop so that you have extra real estate to spread out the different parts of your DAW that you are using. You will also need some sort of audio interface, because typically your built-in sound card is not going to be good enough. And that's going to connect to either headphones, which is the cheaper option, or studio monitors, which, if you have a decent setup in your room, can be a great way to listen to music. It is far less fatiguing on your ears than using headphones. And you may hear people say you can't mix on headphones. I'm here to tell you, you absolutely can mix on headphones. And the last thing on this list is a MIDI keyboard. Now, you don't necessarily have to be a pianist to use a MIDI keyboard, but it is a very efficient way of programming notes into a DAW. So learning some basic chords, you don't have to play at full speed, but it is a really handy piece of kit when you are building multiple tracks with multiple instruments. So here's a suggestion. This is just my personal choice of, if I was going to go out and set up today for a relatively cheap price, I would start with a Mac Mini. They're about £650 at the moment. You can spend a bit more if you want more RAM, but at the moment I think that is an M2 with 8 gigs of RAM you can pick those up for. Obviously, you would need to consider that you will need a monitor if you get a Mac Mini. I'm not endorsing Mac here, by the way. I'm just saying this is an option for a setup. You can go completely different here. You can have a laptop, a MacBook, a Windows desktop, but you get the idea. So I've got a computer. Don't forget to budget for the monitor. You're going to need an audio interface. I'd say the Focusrite 2i2 at the moment is around about £100, and it will do a great job for you. I use the DT990s Dynamics. I find them very comfortable. They're open back, so not great if you're also trying to record vocals. But I can put these on for a considerable amount of time. They have a very flat response across the EQ, so they come in about £120. A reasonable MIDI keyboard that has sort of sensible sized keys. They're not mini or micro keys. It's got a selection of pads and controllers that you can assign to your DAW to speed up your workflow. That's around £80 at the moment. And I know this isn't hardware, but don't forget to budget for the DAW that you are going to use. I think Logic at the moment is around £200. So that setup at the moment would come in at $1,350, and today's exchange rate, that would be $1,715. So those are the things that could get you up and running. Okay, yes, you are going to need a mouse and a keyboard and maybe an extension cord, and so maybe round that up to 1,400. Once you've got the basics set up, there are some nice to haves. So these are things to think about as you are going forward. One of those is making sure you get an external solid state drive. The Samsung T7 is massively well reviewed on the internet, and you want to be storing samples that you get, and your projects want to be on this external drive. If your main computer goes down and all your hard work is on there, you may end up crying. I've put this one on because surprisingly you will be sitting down at your computer quite a lot, and there is a lot to be said for having a comfy chair that supports your back and you can sit in for a decent amount of time. So I would definitely put that high on your list. Depending on how you use your DAW and how useful you find this, you may find there is an iPad or a tablet application that can help speed up your workflow. In my case, I've got an iPad because Logic specifically has Logic Remote. Some people like using these Stream Deck controllers because you can assign specific actions to the buttons, and it saves you remembering an awful lot of shortcuts, and it can be very close to hand and perform operations quickly. You can get bigger ones than that as well. And then you've got faders. So that's an example from Monogram, which is a sort of clip-in unit. There are lots of other fader options you can get that plug in via USB to your computer, and that is really useful when you are controlling the automation in the DAW. So you can actually play in live and control your dynamics and expression and a multitude of other parameters. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on hardware. What are yours? Leave them in the comments. Okay, so demo time. Let's just have a little think about what we mean by this basic mixing process. what's the aim of mixing? Why are we doing this mysterious art of mixing a track? Well, the priority is to produce a track that has a maximum output of -1 dB. That is a generalization, but a lot of libraries that I have worked with have that requirement. The loudest part of your track can only go to -1 dB. The second thing you're trying to do in mixing is balance the instruments to create the sound that you are after. And that's personal choice. And thirdly, you also want to make sure that you can hear each instrument clearly most of the time. Now, the interesting thing is the order to do this is actually reversed. So what we're going to do is EQ each track in solo and remove any unwanted frequencies so that we can hear each instrument clearly. Then we're going to mix the instruments to create the sound that we want. And finally, we are going to add effects to the master output so that the loudest part of our track has a maximum level of -1 dB. Following these basic rules will get you fairly close to a professional quality mix that you could submit to a music library. Okay, let's head over to Logic and see how we do that in practice. Okay, welcome to a Logic session. This is a track called 10 out of tension, and funnily enough, it is a light tension cue. I'm going to just play you the loudest part of this track, which is here where all the instruments are in. So this is what we have at the moment. No mixing has been done. Okay, so it sounds okay-ish. If we look at the stereo output, it is going to -4.5. But like we said, we want this to be at -1 in the loudest part of the cue. So remember, we're going to go about this in reverse order from our target, which is getting that to -1 dB. The first thing we're going to do is go through each of the tracks and listen to them in solo mode and check the EQ doesn't have any extra frequencies that we're not expecting. And if we are not expecting a sound to have low frequencies, let's make sure none are introduced, and the same is true of high frequencies. So here we go with some spiccato strings. I know that that definitely doesn't need any bass. You don't want to remove too much. So there we go, first track done. Now we get to the violas. I may have to speed this up, but I think it is useful to see the whole process. Now the violas, I know I don't really want them to have any high frequencies, but there are sometimes resonant frequencies. So long as you're not killing the entire sound. This is quite a high played cello, so let's just leave it as that. Now the bass, pizzicato. We know we don't want any high end on this, but we don't want it to go woofy and wobbly like that. Some people will say even for bass instruments you should take off the very low frequencies so they don't accidentally build up and become sort of woofy or muddy. Next we've got some low strings, which I had already taken off the low end. And there we go. Now we've got a dulcimer. That definitely doesn't need any low end. And we'll leave the top alone. Xylophone. This is where you can actually have a profound effect on an instrument by removing lower frequencies. But I quite like that lower 500 Hertz sound. Now we've got a glockenspiel even higher. Okay, so we've got a bass coming in here. There's quite a lot of airy sound to that, which actually is going to be removed by adding that filter. But I do quite like it, so I'm not going to be quite so harsh in cutting it off. Gives a nice sense of space, presence. Again, I'm going to just make sure it doesn't build up in the low frequencies. Sometimes you might want to find any frequencies that stand out, because there is a bit of a peak there. So you find the peak and then you can drop it down a bit. And a lot of this is about playing around with the sounds that you've got and learning how they work together. So now that I quite like without doing anything to it. Percussions, sometimes you can leave it because there are low and high frequencies that interact with each other. So what's that sounding like overall? Okay, and the stereo output is still around about the same level. Now, what we want to do is the second part, which was mixing the sounds. So we've EQ'd each of the tracks. Now we're going to mix them together. Now, as you get quicker at this, you will find yourself mixing and leveling as you go. I have specifically not done that on this track, so I can show you a way to start out learning how to do it. And that is put everything to 0. Okay, so all the instruments, not these reverbs or the stereo out or the master, but every instrument track that we've got going on, I'm going to put to 0. And then what we're going to do is start it playing and bring in the instruments one at a time so that we get an overall level that is about -3, -4 on this sort of track, because there's not a lot going on. But I know that the final step where we are putting our effects on the stereo out is going to increase the level further. So if I'm at -4-ish when I've done this mixing, we should be good to go on to the last stage. So that is now playing. Let's bring in some percussion to start with. So on its own, this isn't particularly creating a particularly loud sound. When you start mixing in other instruments, they will build on top of each other. You can always go back and change it, so trial and error is great. Let's bring in the bass. Okay, and let's go across to the strings. Remember that higher pitch sounds are perceived louder. So the viola, possibly you could say, will always need to be louder than those higher spiccato strings. Not always the case, but have that in the back of your mind. Dulcimer. The other thing you can do when you are mixing, don't forget, is you can change the balance left and right. So if I've got a xylophone and a glockenspiel here, what I might do is use stereo pan to move the glock to the right, and the xylophone an equal amount to the left, so it separates the two sounds. Okay, so we're at -8, -9. So we do have a bit more room to push each of these up a little bit. Okay, that's sounding pretty good. So we've gone through and made sure our EQs were good on each of the instruments. Now we've mixed them together and we've done a little bit of panning on the xylophone and the glockenspiel. Some of the other instruments are naturally panned to the left and the right because they were recorded in an orchestral setting. So on to the master effects. Now I'm going to show you a sequence you can use using stock Logic plugins. It will be true for other DAWs where you can find standard plugins. These days, there is the mastering assistant in Logic, which is brilliant. There are also options like Ozone, which will have a combination of effects all ready to go preloaded for you, but it is useful to understand the process and what is going on in each of those units anyway. So this is a common way that I used to master the sound on the stereo output. So one of the first things I would do is put some reverb on it, something like 1.7 seconds, and this negative 10 dB wet signal is probably going to be too loud straight out of the box. So that is really echoey. But what you notice is, as you subtly bring it in, it adds a nice little bit of space to the whole sound, but without making it sound moody. Okay, I'm happy with that. So there's a bit of reverb. Then you could add an effect like an exciter. In Logic, color 2 is slightly less harsh than 1. You can pick the frequency it operates at. Probably don't want to push it too much on the harmonics. Turn it back on. So it's picking out that sort of mid to high range, which is quite nice. Then stereo spread is an interesting one. So that's a weird. I don't want to affect the bass and have it. Don't want to spread the bass out. The bass you want sort of concentrated in the centre, but it does work quite well on the higher frequencies. So without, with. It's quite a subtle difference. But again, it's adding to that sense of space. Always keeping an eye on the master output so we're not going too high. Then I would apply some sort of compression to it. This is going to bring up the final level. I quite like the fast attack and the slow attack. See, that's gone quite high already. Quite like that. And then we get to the final stage of mixing, which is actually what we said was the primary aim of mixing, and that is to make sure that the loudest part of our track is at -1 dB. And a great way to do that is an adaptive limiter, which can add some gain, but we can set the output ceiling to -1. And let's see how that sounds. Do we get to -1? Yep. And there is about just over a decibels reduction at the loudest part. You could push the gain up a little bit if you want it louder, but it's still going to be limited to -1, so you're bringing up all the other frequencies. I don't think it needs that. We're okay. And there you have it. So we have a loudest part of our track is at -1 dB. We've mixed the sounds to get the effect that I'm after. You might mix that completely differently, absolutely fine. But those are the basic principles. We EQ each track, we then mix and balance our sounds, and then we do the final processing on the stereo output channel. I hope you found that useful. Thanks, as always, for watching to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe, or if you prefer, subscribe and then like it. It really does help support the channel. That's it for today. I'll see you for another Music Monday, 5 o'clock next week. Bye for now.